Nodding faces, and nodding is good as long as you're not nodding off. Uh, yeah. So again, welcome. This is the inaugural class or lesson, whatever you'd like to call it, of our course in Pirke Avot, which means the ethics of the fathers. It has different names in English. Basically, it's also been translated as chapters of the fathers. And we're going to try to understand more of what does this mean? What is this book? It's a collection of 6 chapters of ethics and morals, etc. And before we actually go into the text of Pirkei Avot, of the Ethics of the Fathers, we need to get a little bit of a background into what it is, when was it written, who, what, when, where, how, all these kinds of questions. You may be wondering, at what point can you interrupt? And I would say that here's the best situation if we can do it, is for me to talk, explain, whatever, for a few minutes, and then I could ask, does anybody have any questions? And then you can feel free to ask them. Um, Otherwise, this is the first time we're doing it, so uh, maybe once you have the question and you feel like you must ask it. So let's try that. We'll see what works. Okay. Um, Again, this is inaugural. And it's not only for tonight, but for the next 3 Wednesday nights. So if tonight works well and the next 3 Wednesday nights work well, we'll see where we go. But tonight, I'm very pleased and proud and honored to begin our study of Pirkei Avot. So does anybody have any questions to start with? Any opening questions like, oh, I was wondering about, I mean, focused on what we're going to study, Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. If you have any questions right now, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go into our introduction, see the context of what it is that we're going to be studying, etc. So, many of you may have heard of the terms Talmud or Gemara. Talmud or Gemara. Just by a raise of hands, how many of you have heard either of these terms, Talmud or, okay, so I see many of you, and I appreciate that. That's great. So the Talmud is the Hebrew name for it. Gemara is the Aramaic name for it. A lot of the Talmud is communicated in Aramaic because that was the language of the time. So you said language of the time, what time was Pirkei Avot written or compiled? And I would say roughly 1800 years ago, 1800 to 2000 years ago. So it's an ancient text. It's not yesterday's work, which means that it's aged over the years, and there's a lot of collective wisdom in Pirkei Avot, but it is part of the Talmud. So if you were to ask me what is the Talmud, I would say it's a major work of Jewish study. It was compiled over a period of about several hundred years, the entire Talmud. So you see some volumes behind me. It's not exactly clear, but to this side, I'm pointing to some volumes of the Talmud. And in this set, there are 73 volumes of the Talmud. 70, yes. So in about 1924, 1925 in Poland, there was a Rabbi Shapira who had a great idea. And he said, there's this massive collection called the Talmud or the Gemara. And wouldn't it be nice if the entire population of the world, the Jewish population, could study the Talmud 1 page a day? So I'll just show you what a page looks like. A page is, um, okay, not so clear, but here's a page, okay, something like that. And then on the other side, there's a flip side to that same page. Thank you, Rivka. You're doing something that's going to be very helpful to us. What it is, I don't know. Ah, very nice. Okay. So basically, you have a page. This is the translation of this page. This is the page itself. And then when you flip the page, there is the side B of the same page. Okay? So every page of the Talmud has a side A and a side B. If somebody were to take upon themselves, which I did a few years ago, to study the entirety of the Talmud, every page, A side and B side. There are 2,711 pages in the entire Talmud, and it would take you 7.5 years to go through the entire Talmud. So I did that a few years ago. It was beautiful to do it. I cried at the end, just kind of, so delighted that I could go through the entire Talmud at least one time. So it's a major work of Jewish study, compiled again over a several hundred-year period. It was completed in around the 5th century, give or take. The Talmud is based on the Mishnah, which is the oral law, which is part of what was given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 20. So the Talmud is this gargantuan, again, 73 volumes behind me. Um, and the reason I mentioned the Talmud in the introduction is because Pirke Avot is part of the Talmud. What I haven't mentioned yet is there are two Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud, which was written, created, studied in Babylon, which is what I tend to do unless you stop me. No, no, I'm just kidding. Babylon, the Babylonian period. Where is Babylon today?
Iraq.
Iraq. I think you're right. So there was the Babylonian Talmud when the Jewish people were exiled out of the country of Israel, ended up in Bavel or Babylon. There's the Babylonian Talmud, which is the most prominent one. And then there's also called the Jerusalem Talmud. Guess where that was written and compiled? Right here in Israel. The Jerusalem Talmud today is studied by some. The Babylonian Talmud is studied by many more than the Jerusalem Talmud. I think it's fair to say that. So when did God give the entirety of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Ten Commandments? When did God give that? Roughly 3,337 years ago. So what's that got to do with Pirkei Avot? We're getting there. Thank you for sticking with this introduction because you need to know the context of where this work comes from. So, Jewish tradition teaches that there were two types of laws given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai 3,000 plus years ago. There were two kinds of laws. One was the written law. God says to Moses, write this down. And during their 40 years in the desert, according to some opinions, every few intervals, whatever that is, God says to Moses, write down what I'm going to dictate to you. This is what happened in the last few, what, days, weeks, months, depends on the interpretation that you accept. How often did God dictate the events that Moses was to write down? So what did God give to Moses for the children of Israel and for the rest of the world at Mount Sinai? He gave the written law, which is what we call the 5 books of Moses, called in Hebrew the Chumash, from the word Chamesh in Hebrew, which means 5 books of Moses. And we believe that God also gave to Moses an oral law, an oral tradition which was needed to better understand the written tradition. So, written tradition is written, it's about 6,000 verses in the 5 books of Moses. Many of the verses are not that clear, they're not that understandable right away. And so, what explains much of what's not easily understandable? That was given in the oral tradition, both the written and the oral given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai, Exodus chapter 20, 3,337 years ago. So, what's that got to do with Pirkei Avot? And the answer is we're getting there. Just important to give you this sense of a background. So now we have a written law, we have an oral law. The Torah, as I mentioned, has about 6,000 verses, the 5 books of Moses, and it's rich in principles, it's rich in commandments. The Jewish people believe that in the 5 books of Moses there are 613 commandments. And some of the commandments were meant for the Jews specifically. Some of the commandments were meant for the nations of the world. We have identified 7 what we call Noahide laws given to Noah right after the flood. And some have taken those 7 to be thought of as headline laws or commandments. But if you were to chop those seven into their various pieces, you would end up with actually 65 Noahide laws. In any case, the Torah contains all kinds of laws, all kinds of commandments, and you need often a walnut cracker to understand exactly what did God mean when he said this verse? What did God mean when he said this paragraph? So the oral law comes very often to fully understand what it is in the written law. So back to the Talmud. It's a work that describes dozens and dozens of rabbis and sages over about a 500-year period, debating, discussing. And the major question is, when God said X, what did he really mean by that? So again, so you would say, well, read the verse. Yeah, but sometimes the verse is a little bit a word that rhymes with verse, and the word is terse. Sometimes it's just a little too compact, and we're not exactly sure what God meant. That's where the rabbis of the Talmud come and debate. God meant this or God meant that. How do you know he meant that? I have a verse to prove from another source that the same word that is used here was also used in another context. Anyway, that's how the Torah goes. That's how the commentaries go. Now, as you can imagine, the Talmud contains a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. What did God mean? What did he want to say when he said this or that? And there are a lot of laws in their applications covering every facet of life, death, guidance on matters great and small. So I will tell you, when I studied the entire Talmud a few years ago, took 7.5 years, I was surprised to find that in one of the volumes of the Talmud, there were pages and pages that dealt with issues of going to the toilet. I was a surprise. Let's talk. How much can you say about going to the toilet?
Not very much.
Not very much. And yet, the rabbis of the Talmud discussed what is the comportment of a person when they use the bathroom. What about a blessing that you say, acknowledging God when you come out of the bathroom? Thank you that the entire system works as well as it works, and God willing, it works. Because if it doesn't work, then we have problems. And many other issues that are related to going to the bathroom. Uh, I, I'll be honest with you, I don't remember all issues is a good word to use here. I don't remember all the different facets of the discussion, but it went on for pages and pages. I only mention that to say that the debates and discussions of the Talmud hit all aspects of life and living and offer all kinds of guidance, etc. So, as I mentioned, the Talmud has 2,711 pages. And so, what does that have to do with Pirke Avot, Ethics of the Fathers? Here's what it has to do with it. 62 of the 63 tractates, meaning general categories of the Talmud, 62 of the 63 have commentary. There's only one that just mentions teachings, but there's no commentary. That's not to say that rabbis didn't comment about the teachings. They did. I have got 15 books behind me on my shelf of different interpretations of Pirkei Avot, of the teachings found in the Ethics of the Fathers, chapters of the Fathers, whatever you'd like to call it. So some of these tractates or large categorical volumes are as short as 24 pages. The longest is 176 pages. But out of all the volumes of the Talmud, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, is the only one that has no official commentary. So it has rabbis, great sages over the centuries, give lessons on morality, ethics, etc. Here's the best way to live a life, but there's no Talmudic commentary on those lessons. And again, that doesn't mean nobody comments on it. There are plenty of rabbis who do. But in the official record of the Talmud, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, is the only one that has no Talmud discussion by rabbis. So you would say, well, how many lessons are there in Pirkei Avot? Well, First of all, there's 6 chapters of it. If you were to ask me the question, is each chapter thematic? I would say no. How how the compilers of Pirkei Avot did it, I don't know that I can tell you the answer to that question. But there are 6 chapters of Pirkei Avot. There are 128 concise lessons that are taught by around 65 different rabbis. So some rabbis like Hillel or Shammai or Rabbi Akiva or others that may be better known than some of the other rabbis, they may have more than one teaching. So if there's 128 lessons and only 65 rabbis, clearly some of them repeat other lessons that they want to impart for the people who are studying. So these are written by great, great rabbis and sages. All of these 128 lessons are written by, these would be big names. If you were a student, a scholar, any one of these 128 names, you would say, your reaction would be, "Psh, wow." It's like a list of actors and actresses. Look at the front row of the Academy Awards or the Emmy Awards or some of the award shows. Who's sitting in the front row? The hoo-has, right? Whoever they are. These are the big names. And so, in the same way, the rabbis who teach lessons in Pirkei Avot are, in a sense, the marquee names of Jewish scholarship, but not of current scholarship. This goes back 1800 to 2000 years ago. So, one of the reasons why I like Pirkei Avot, and I've taught it for many, many years, different audiences. I've taught it for 8th graders, adults, seniors, anybody who's at 80, 90 and above, as long as they're breathing. It's a good thing when students are breathing. I think you'll agree. One of the reasons I like Pirkei Avot is because these great rabbis and the kind of lessons that they impart, what they're teaching everybody who's studying what their lessons are, it's almost a surprise to hear them talk about the lessons that they mention. I'll give you an example. Let's say you were to have lunch with the Supreme Court Justice of the United States. Okay? So you're having lunch. What would you expect to hear from the Supreme Court Justice as you're talking? There's no agenda. You're schmoozing. Please pass the salt. Please pass the this. And now the Supreme Court Justice is talking. What would you expect this person to talk about?
His latest judgment?
Latest judgment. Anything else?
Laws pertinent to today.
Laws pertinent to today.
His most exciting case he had.
Most exciting case. The 3 responses that I've heard all deal with courts, judgment, the system, Supreme Court, etc. What we find with these great rabbis who teach lessons in Pirkei Avot, we find that they're talking about mundane is not the right word. We find that they're talking, it would almost be like you're having lunch with the Supreme Court Justice, and the justice says to you, you know what I found out on Google? I found out that if you press this particular button and if you talk into it'll yield the following. And you say, wow, that's interesting. How do you know that? Or the Supreme Court Justice will say, here's a great idea. When you take a shower and you have one of those square things where all the water spritzes out of the different nozzles, if you turn the temperature thing all the way to the left, you will find out that everything comes out a lot quicker than you thought it would. And you say, why are you talking about that? And what I'm trying to get at is what the rabbis talk about is very surprising. Their lessons they're scholarly lessons, but they're easily understood. It's beautiful stuff right over the plate. I mean, they have their interpretations, but it's not something difficult or scholarly, or you have to crack your head to find out what is the Supreme Court Justice saying. They are beautiful nuggets of ethics and morals that I find every time I study it. I wouldn't have expected it from a Rabbi Akiva who knows so much about life He spent his life sitting in the study hall. What does he know about the outside world? And you know what we find out? We found out that many of the rabbis quoted in the Pirke Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, knew a whole lot about what's going on in the outside world. They knew a lot about humanity. They knew a lot about ethics and morals and how people think and feel, and they knew how to address that. So they were, in some sense, cloistered and sequestered in the study hall, but the kind of intelligence that they had was applicable to all aspects of life. And I guess that's what always surprises me, that they are talking about life in general, and they could be excused for not knowing anything about life, because why? They're in the study hall with their nose in their books. And what we find out is they have wide wisdom that they are anxious to share with the students. So that's why I find Pirke Avot absolutely irresistible. It's not a legal text. It doesn't focus on laws, but it does focus on character. It focuses on ethical development. It focuses on moral growth. It focuses on ethical excellence. And the major goal of Pirkei Avot, that was written again about 1800 to 2000 years ago, is to shape and polish a person's moral character. That's the bottom line. It's looking to shape and polish a person's moral character. So we made Aliyah from Baltimore, Maryland. And in Baltimore, there happened to be a shoe. What would be the term? Somebody fixes shoes?
Cobbler.
Thank you very much, righty. A cobbler. Okay. I don't know if I would have thought of that word in the next half hour, but fixes shoes, the soles, and everything else. So I'm standing there. He's with another customer, and they're speaking Russian to each other. And now comes the assistant, and the boss now needs to tell the assistant what this particular client needs done to the pairs of shoes. So he says in Russian, which I don't speak, he says, da 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 da, buff and polish. So he didn't say buff and polish in Russian, he said it in English. Apparently, it's a term that they use a lot in this shop. Blah, 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 and buff and polish. And when I heard that word, I said, that describes Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, to a T. That's what this whole 6-chapter, 128 lessons is looking to do, to buff and polish the character of the one who is studying it. So I will give you a term that I probably will use often, and that term is called derech eretz. Derech eretz has a couple of meanings. Number one, it could mean the way of the land. The way of the land. Here's what people do in Israel. Here's the culture in Ethiopia. Here's the culture in America, whatever. It's the way of the land. But derech eretz also means having moral compass. To behave in a way that's decent, good, compassionate, kind. So there were 2 kosher Dunkin' Donut shops in Baltimore. One was larger, one was smaller. I think they're down to 1 right now. And in this shop, sometimes people would come in early in the morning. They haven't yet had their coffee, so they're a little bit grumpy. Okay? And they would walk in, mostly Jewish people would walk into the kosher Dunkin' Donuts, and they would walk in. Most of the people had very nice ways of ordering things. Hi, good morning. I would like a latte with 3 Splenda, and if you have any half and half, I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And they would make whatever the order is. Sometimes it would grate on my nerves to see people who I would consider religious Jews barking their order at the people behind the counter. Hi, I want a cup of coffee and don't put too much sugar in it. Yeah, with a face that looks like angry, impatient. The second way lacks derech eretz. The first way is nice, kind, smiley, very embracing, very sweet. The second way lacks derech eretz. So basically, what does Pirkei Avot want to do to the ones that are studying it? Buff and polish our character, and it wants us to have a fine sense of derech eretz. Um, Years ago, when we made Aliyah in 2010, we were met by somebody you may know, you may have heard him do broadcast. His name is Yishai Fleischer. Is anybody familiar with that name? Yishai Fleischer, wonderful, lives in Efrat, where we live. We've had many meals together with their family, etc. When we got off the plane, my wife and I got off the plane, he comes over to us because he knew us by then. Are there any words you'd like to say to our audience now that you've just made Aliyah to Israel? Yes, yes, we're happy to be here. We're so thrilled, etc., etc. And then he says, you too, he says to me and my wife, you too ought to do a radio show. I am the English coordinator of English programs on a radio station called Arutz Sheva. I don't think it's on the radio dial. Look how I'm doing a dial. That ages me. I don't think it's on the actual radio in a car, but it's a website based radio station. He says, you guys ought to do a radio show because you guys are so good together. You make nice comments with each other, whatever. How would you like to do a show? And my wife Rivka says, I'm not doing a show. Elon will do a show. Because when I was younger, I used to do 5 years of TV work in Rhode Island. She said, he'll do a show. So Yishai says, oh, okay, that's very nice. You pick your topic, pick your title. I didn't have to think 2 seconds. I said, the topic I would like to talk about is Derech Eretz. It'll be a half hour or an hour, whatever it was, all about how do we buff and polish our character. And it went on for 5 years. Who was listening? I couldn't tell you. They often didn't say to the hosts, here's how many people listened this week or whatever. But many people would come up to me and say, oh, your voice sounds familiar. Are you the Derech Eretz guy? And I was happy to be known as the Derech Eretz guy. And that's what Pirkei Avot is basically all about. So let's ask some questions about Pirkei Avot. And hopefully we'll have a little time to even look at the very first part of the text of Pirkei Avot. So let me just take a look here at my notes. Okay. You may already have some questions about Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, and well, I'll pause right now. Given this introduction, is just a smidge more. Anybody have any questions? Is anything fuzzy? Have I not explained something well enough that we can go on? Does anybody have any question about something that's not clear? Or yeah, let's move along. So not seeing any questions? Okay, good. So here's some questions you may have had, and you didn't even know you had these questions. Here's some questions that I would have if I was hearing this stuff for the first time. Okay, it's called the Ethics of the Fathers. Who are they? What fathers? Is this a manual for like fathers of kids? Is this a manual for parents? When you call it the Ethics of the Fathers, who are the fathers? That would be a question that I might have. Who was this Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, written for? 6 chapters, written for who? Is this written for a specific population? Is it written for a general population? That might be a question I would have. Is Pirkei Avot written for just Jewish people? Now here I have to be very honest and disclosing. Pirkei Avot is a Jewish text. All 128 authors of lessons, all Jews. Today we would call them Orthodox Jews. All very traditional, religious Orthodox rabbis. So is it a Jewish text? It is, no question about it. Was it meant for Jews? Probably when it was written, compiled, I would say probably, no question. However, is there anything that people of the nations, of other religions, whoever they are, is it relevant to them as well? can it be relevant to them as well? And there, I would say absolutely. So, is it a Jewish text? Yes. Written by Jews? Yes. Religious Orthodox Jewish rabbis? Yes. Meant for Jews? Probably in its early stages. But as the world needs more derech eretz, by the way, I would ask you this question. Do you feel, wherever you live, do you feel that the world needs more derech eretz?
Definitely.
That's a good word, definitely. It's so lacking. Our world today so lacks this just common decency. And that's pretty much what derech eretz is, common decency, which unfortunately is not always so common. But you can see in a world today where everybody says what they think. You look at Facebook, uh, Twitter, whatever it is that you look at, Instagram, everybody's expressing themselves. Um, um, so, yes, Jewish work, no question about it. Is it meaningful to people of other faiths? Absolutely. There's no question in my mind that for people of any faith beyond Jews to be studying Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, is extremely, extremely valuable. So here's another question you might ask. Is this study of Pirkei Avot general study? In other words, can you study it any time? The answer is yes. Is there a specific time in the Jewish calendar year where Jewish people study Pirkei Avot during a specific calendar time? And the answer to that is also yes. You can study it any time of the day, any day of the year. However, between the holidays of Pesach or Passover and the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, there is a custom on the Sabbath afternoon, Shabbat afternoon, to study one chapter of the six every Shabbat afternoon. That is the tradition. That is the custom. Does every Jew do that? No. Do many? Yeah, many follow that tradition. So why is it between Passover and Rosh Hashanah? It's about a 6 month period. Why specifically during that time of year? Pirkei Avot is studied during the afternoons on Shabbat, Saturday afternoons. And many people give the answer, those are the long Shabbat afternoons. Shabbat doesn't go out during those months until sometimes 7, 7:30, 8, 8:30. When I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, sometimes Shabbat would leave Saturday night at 9:20. Why 9:20? Because it came in at 8:15 or something like that. So the rabbis were very concerned that on these long Shabbat afternoons, people are going to sit there and twiddle their thumbs, or who knows what they're going to do. They're going to lose in the long afternoon the sense of the Sabbath, the sense of the sacred, the sense of the holy. And let's give the people a text to study, to immerse themselves in a holy endeavor, which I think is a good idea, frankly. If you were to ask me, do I do it every Shabbat afternoon? I don't. Do I do it sometimes? Yes. I don't. Sometimes I do, but often on Shabbat afternoon I study other things. So it's not like I'm just sitting there not doing anything. So that's also a good question. Is there a specific time in the Jewish calendar where Jewish people study this? And again, between Passover and Rosh Hashanah. Another question that you may be thinking of is, who are these rabbis that are quoted? Who are they? Are they random rabbis? Are they like the elite of the elite? And the answer is all kinds of rabbis. But again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, these are the marquee names. These are the big names. These are the people in the first row of the Emmy Awards, the Academy Awards, and some of the other award shows. These are the shining lights of Broadway, if you will. So I'll give you a sense of categories of rabbis that are quoted, and then we'll see if we have time, God willing, for the first piece of text of Pirkei Avot. So the rabbis that are quoted in these 128 lessons, they break up into 5 general groups. For example, group number 1, they are rabbis whose teachings flourished before the destruction of the Second Temple. That happened in the year 70. So People like Hillel, Shammai, you may be familiar with those names. They are quoted as part of the 128 lessons. Another group of rabbis is associated with the academy in Yavne. That's a city in Israel, beginning around the year 70 through the early 100. There's a Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai you may have heard of. He's an example of that second group of rabbis that are quoted. There's a third group of rabbis that flourished in the early hundreds through the rebellion of Bar Kokhba. That happened in the year 135. For example, Rabbi Akiva would fit into that category. There's a fourth category of rabbis who lived from about 135 into the late 100s. There, you may be familiar with a rabbi named Shimon Bar Yochai. He represents that fourth category of quoted rabbis. And then you have in the late hundreds, 200, 300, you have the fifth category of rabbis. So these rabbis span several centuries. The 128 lessons, 65 different rabbis, they span several hundred centuries. So we mentioned the idea of this Pirke Avot being studied on between Passover and Rosh Hashanah. Now comes the question of what Avot. Avot literally means fathers. So why was it called the ethics of the fathers? Pirke Avot. To whom does that refer? And here we have several ideas from various other rabbis and scholars why it's called the ethics or the chapters of the fathers. So one view is the rabbis could be the ones that are quoted as giving lessons. So these are the chapters of the fathers. Who are the fathers? The quoted rabbis who are teaching the lessons. Maybe the Avot fathers perhaps refers to this conglomerate of rabbis because they're teaching important ethical and moral lessons. So we kind of elevate them to the status of, not to the status of parent per se, but because they are teaching us such rich ethical and moral nuggets, we want to honor them by calling them something grand like a parent or a father. Okay, that's one view of why it's called Pirkei Avot. Another view says that these 68 rabbis, 65, 68 rabbis that teach us, they teach the Jewish people and those of other faiths who are interested to learn it. They teach us guiding principles of how to live a moral and ethical life. And these guiding principles are called the Avot. They are the main, they are the highlighted teachings and rabbis. So who are the Avot? Who are the fathers? The general principles and categories of moral and ethical teachings taught by these 60 some odd rabbis. Another view of who are these fathers that we keep on talking about, the ethics of the fathers, they say it's related to the forefathers of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, interestingly enough, in all of these 128 lessons, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are not quoted anywhere. They lived in the early part of Jewish history. They're not quoted anywhere in Pirkei Avot. So by virtue of them, it's called Avot. They are the forefathers of the Jewish people, but they're not quoted. So what's that got to do with anything? And the answer is, one commentary says, well, they are the Avot of the Jewish people. They're the forefathers of the Jewish people. And in that sense, what these 128 lessons given by 68 rabbis, all of these lessons emanate from what we were taught by the three forefathers. In other words, they're somehow connected to the life lessons of the three forefathers. And even though they are not quoted in the 128 lessons, what is quoted is all taken from their wisdom, from their knowledge, from their inspiration. And that's how these 128 lessons were delivered, because the original three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, provided that inspiration, those early lessons that were learned by these 65 or so rabbis. So in that sense, it's Avot. It's the lessons of the ethics of the fathers. Which fathers? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who provided the inspiration for the rabbis that are quoted in the ethics of the fathers. So there are another, actually, a very interesting interpretation says that these 128 lessons are really for parents. Avot. Literally, avot means fathers. But, you extend it, parent. So these are literally lessons that are invaluable for parents to teach their children down throughout the generations. So that's another way to look at it. Uh, um, yeah. So we have seen about 4 or 5 different views as to why this is called Pirke Avot, the ethics of the fathers. Um, and all of them are as correct as any of them. There's no one definitive understanding of why it's called the ethics of the fathers. Some say even that there are many of the laws given in Pirkei Avot, or many of the teachings, relate to judges, judgment, etc. And maybe in that sense, Avot could refer to judges. These are things for judges to know and to master when they deal with in a courtroom, with juries, with a defendant, with clients, etc. So maybe it's meant for them. But once we're going to study actually the text of Pirkei Avot, we're going to see it's not just for judges. It's not just for the legal system in any way. This is for the average, every man and woman that can learn from it. So, okay. Let me just see if we have a little more before we actually go into a text of Pirkei Avot, which I think all of us are anxious to get to. I'm just looking quickly here to see if there's anything more that I want to mention in terms of an intro. Yeah, I'll mention this, and then we'll jump into the text. Where this Pirkei Avot is placed in the Talmud, in all those 73 volumes that are behind me. Okay, I'm pointing up to some of those 73 volumes. It's an interesting thing about where Pirkei Avot is placed in this entire Talmud. So there are 6 sections of the Talmud, six sections of the Mishnah, and they each deal with different topics in general. There are other topics too, but in general, this one will deal with issues of women. This one will deal with holidays. This one will deal with laws of the land of Israel. This one will deal with this and that. So where did the authors of the Talmud place this moral and ethical teaching, Pirkei Avot? Where did they put it? So they put it at the end of a section on damages. Now, if you ask me, where would you put it, Elon? I would say, I don't know, but I don't know that I would put it at the end of the section of damages. What's that got to do with anything? So here's what one great scholar, great rabbi, offers as to why it's at the end of the section on damages. And he says that when you have people who represent their faith, and they're visible in the way they represent. So I'm kind of visible. I have a yarmulke. If you were to look under my shirt, I would have the tzitzit. I wear the fringes. I have this tag that reminds me to bring the hostages home. And if you see me in the morning worship service, I wear tefillin. They look like boxes here and another one on my arm. So this commentary says, why is it the end of damages? Because people who are visibly their faith, whatever it is, I'm Jewish, all of you are what you are. People who are visible representations of their faith, but don't behave with derech eretz, they don't behave with common sense, kindness, compassion, sensitivity, can damage their religion. That's a very interesting point. So if I go to Dunkin' Donuts, the kosher Dunkin' Donuts in Baltimore, and I bark my order at the person behind the counter, and scream and yell that she only put in 2 Splenda. I asked for 4 Splenda. And why did you put in that almond milk? I asked for whatever. And they scream and bark. I, as a representative of the Jewish tradition, can cause damage to my tradition. How? What is the person behind the counter now going to think about Jews? I'll answer the question for you. Not very highly. And that's what we tend to do. We tend to see some person representing a group, an ethnic group or whatever. And what do we say? Oh, they're all like that. They're all like that. Don't expect anything better. They're all that way. So I gravitate towards that explanation. Why is it at the end of damages? It's a reminder that people of faith who visibly represent their faith, if they do it in a way that desecrates God's name, if they do it in a way that shames God and shames their religion, they cause grave damage to their tradition. How? Everybody will generalize and say they're all like that. And that is a great damage to any faith tradition. So that's enough of an introduction, I think. And so I'm now going to share a screen, and we'll look at the very first Mishnah, the very first teaching of Pirke Avot. And let's see if I know how to do this. I should, because my wife Rivka taught me. And let's see how well she taught me. And the answer is fabulously. Isn't that great? Okay. So this is the opening text of Pirke Avot. This is the opening where it says number 1. We'll read it together, and then we'll have some commentary on it. So once again, I'll pause and say, does anybody have any questions so far? Is anything fuzzy? Is anything not exactly clear? Could you please say more about this or that? Absent of that, we'll jump right into number 1. Okay. So I can't see everybody. There's probably something I can press that will allow me to see everybody, but I don't know what that is yet because I'm a techno klutz. Yep. So, okay. Did I just cover part of the text with you? I'm not sure if I did. Can you still see the text, the Hebrew and the English?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, okay. So why? Oh, that's okay. Good. So here's number 1. I'm going to read it to you in English, but there are some of you that may read Hebrew, and I wanted you to see the Hebrew. And the reason the Hebrew is so important is because the translation of Hebrew often doesn't give the exact nuance that the Hebrew does. And we're going to see an example of that in Mishnah or teaching number 1. Okay? So here's how the entire 6 chapters of the text of Pirke Avot begins. Number 1, Moses received the Torah from Sinai. Okay? You see that? Moses received the Torah from Sinai. So now, after our introduction, we could say, oh, he received the Torah, which was the written Torah, the written law, and he also received the oral Torah. He received both. It doesn't say both, but now that we have a little bit of an understanding about what was received by Moses from God at Mount Sinai, we know the Torah was actually 2 related, intertwined laws, oral law and written law. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and gave it over to Joshua. Joshua was his long trusted, some call him the servant of Moses, others call him the student of Moses. What we do know about Joshua is he was with Moses just about full time. Moses pretty much gave up his family life. Joshua likely gave up his family life to be immersed in the Torah, perpetuation of the laws, explanation of the laws, etc. So Moses gets the Torah from Mount Sinai, gives it over to Joshua. Joshua gave the tradition, whatever that is, oral law, written law together. Joshua gave that tradition over to the elders. Okay, we'll have to find out who are they? Who are the elders? And when did that happen? What time in our calendar did it happen? Once the period of the elders ended, the elders gave it to the prophets. Okay, there was a long period of prophets that we find in the Bible. Once the period of the prophets was over, they gave that entirety of the tradition to the men of the Great Assembly. Question is, who are they? When did they exist? What did they do? How many of them were there? What was their authority, etc.? So now it says they, the men of the Great Assembly, would always say these three things. So you and I would say always. What do they babble these three things? Well, you would sit next to them having a cup of coffee, and this is what they would babble for the entirety of your lunch together? No. Often say these three things means to indicate they were known by these three terse lessons. And let's see what these lessons are. Be cautious in judgment. Oh, so we said that maybe Pirke Avot is called the Ethics of the Fathers. Maybe it's who are the fathers. Maybe it's a book that has a lot to say to judges, how to conduct a courtroom, how to listen to testimony, how to listen to the attorneys, how to listen to the witnesses, etc. Already we have a sense of maybe that's what part of it is all about. Be cautious in judgment. Here's another teaching: establish many pupils and make a safety fence around the Torah. So the men of the Great Assembly, whoever they were, whenever they lived, we have to find out, they were known by these three mega lessons. Again, be cautious in judgment, establish many pupils, and make a safety fence around the Torah. So just looking at number one, does anybody have any question, comment, something they want to say something about, a piece of it, all of it? The floor is yours.
What does make a safety fence around the Torah mean?
That's a great question. What does make a safety fence around the Torah mean? Okay. I don't know that I'm going to answer that right now. I'm just looking for questions, but that's a good question. What does it mean to make a fence around why does the Torah, the oral written law as embodied in the 5 books of Moses, which carry us from creation to the death of Moses, why does that need a fence around it? For what purpose? Well, are people attacking it? Do you mean a literal fence? Does it need a literal fence? Or is it a spiritual fence? What exactly does that mean? That's a good question. Anything else curious? So I would say, if I was looking at this the first time, I would say, well, here's something curious. Moses, if you're trying to say that there's any sense of divinity about these lessons, yeah, Rabbi Akiva said it. Yeah, Rabbi this said it. Yeah, Rabbi said that. But if you're trying to say to me that there's a sense of the divine, whatever they're teaching didn't just come from their head 2 days before they wrote it. If you're trying to tell me that these 128 lessons taught by 68 great mega rabbis, there's something divine about these lessons. Okay, Moses received the Torah from Sinai. But I think a better way to say it is Moses received the Torah from, what would be a better word?
Elohim.
Elohim, or God, some form, Jewish form of the word God. I would say that that's a bigger thing than receiving it from Sinai. Moses received the Torah from God. That's a statement. And saying it's from God is bigger than saying it's from the mountain of Sinai. Did the mountain of Sinai give Moses anything? Moses was on the mountain, but the mountain didn't give Moses anything that he could receive. He received it from God. To me, that would be a better way of saying it. If you want to establish that there's something divine about all of these lessons, and these are not just good ideas from people, great rabbis sitting at the beach smoking a cigar, having a martini, and coming up with these great lessons. If you want to tell me there's something more divine than that, you should have said Moses received the Torah from God. However, it doesn't say that, and we have to explain why it doesn't say that. Are we going to explain that now? Not necessarily, because we have another 2-3 minutes. Any other questions?
Yes, Rabbi.
Yes.
Men of the Great Assembly, would that be like the priests and the Levites, or who are the men of the Great Assembly?
That's a great question. Who are they? Who are they? How they were chosen? When did they live? What part of the Jewish calendar did the men of the Great Assembly live? What did they do? What makes them great? Why were they called the Great Assembly? Again, I don't know that we don't have time now to answer these questions. We're just looking at little pieces of this first mission of the first teaching that has our attention and curiosity. What is that? What does it mean that they would always say these three things? Is that the only three things they ever taught? Didn't they have more to say? I will tell you that a lot of the Jewish prayers on a daily basis were created and taught by the men of the Great Assembly. A lot of what I pray on a daily basis comes from the men of the Great Assembly. So, caught ya. They didn't just say these three things. They taught a lot more. But why are we focusing specifically on these three when we know they taught a lot more than just these three lessons? So again, is there any other, given another 2 minutes that we have, anything else that's a curiosity or you're looking at it and go, what does it mean by that? So here's something that you don't see in the English, but you do see in the Hebrew. And that's what I was saying before, that often the English doesn't always capture the nuance of the Hebrew. So in English, it says Moses received the Torah from Sinai and gave it over to Joshua. The Hebrew word for to give over is found at the end of the first Hebrew line. I'll read it for you. It's the word umisara. Umisara. Moses received the Torah from Sinai, umisara, and he handed it over to Joshua. The English says he gave it over. The Hebrew word misara has a whole other deeper connotation. Again, I can just mention a smidge of it now, and then we'll have to end and wish each other a good rest of the week. The idea of misara, or the Hebrew infinitive, limsor, to hand over, is not just a handing over. I'll give you an example. Let's say one of you on the call today, we're sitting in front of me and you ask for a pen. So I would say, right, I got a pen in my hand. Yeah, here's a pen. Just you need a pen, here's a pen. If I was holding a baby in my hand and you said, do me a favor, please hand over the baby, handing over the baby is done with a different level of care and a different level of investment than handing over a pen. Now, would you agree to that? You hand over a baby a lot more carefully than you hand over a pen. And that's the connotation of the word umisara. So when Moses gives it over to Joshua, yeah, the English, he gave it over. Here's the stuff. Here's what you need to know. The exam is next Monday. But he didn't just give it over. He gave it over with emotion. He gave it over with meaning. He gave it over with depth. He gave it over to Joshua with great investment. And that word misara contains all that, but gave doesn't contain all that. And I'll mention one more nuance from that word umisara. The word limsor, to give over, also has the connotation, and it's used in Hebrew in this way as well. It also has the connotation of sometimes you have to give your life over for teaching this stuff. Sometimes a Torah scholar will have to sacrifice their life to teach this Pirkei Avot or the Torah or the Talmud? Have there been periods in our Jewish history where great rabbis and scholars, their lives were put on the line when the fill in the blank enemy said, you Jews, you may not study the Torah, you may not keep the Sabbath, you may not keep kosher laws. What is the punishment? Off with your head. How many times did that happen in Jewish history? And the answer is plenty, unfortunately. So when it says Moses received the Torah from Sinai and handed it over lovingly, investedly to Joshua, it means exactly that, with great care and great emotion. But it also is a code word that sometimes in our Jewish history, in order to teach the Torah against the edict of the ruling government, you may have to end up limsor, giving over your life. And that's your decision. Do you want to teach publicly, even though the Greeks, the Romans, whoever said you may not? That's your decision. But sometimes you may feel so compelled to teach this stuff, it may cost you your life. So I think this is where we will stop. Again, I think my wife made sure that this is recorded so you can listen to it at another time. We'll write on the WhatsApp group where you can find the recording. Probably be on YouTube somewhere. You'll get the link, I'm pretty sure. Anybody have any closing remarks, closing comments, questions? I'm honored and privileged to teach this Pirkei Avot. And God willing, next Wednesday at 8 Israel time and whatever it is your time, we will continue in the text. So we're done with the intro. We'll continue with the text. I think you will find these nuggets delicious. I find them ever delicious. And I've taught Pirkei Avot 25 times. I love it, and it's sweet. So, Robert, you have a question.
Yeah, like the Messerites were commanded to really protect the Torah and hand it over to the next generations
Yes.
exactly. Is that where this word comes from?
Yes, Masorah, the Mesorites, the Masoretic text. That's where it comes from. Yeah. Uh, there was a great rabbi who passed away a few decades ago that I knew very, very well. And he would remind his students that when you refer to the sages of Jewish history, the sages, the great rabbis, etc., he says, we call them in Hebrew, and I'll translate, Chachmei HaMisorah. These are the scholars of handing over. The job of the great scholar is not to keep it to himself or herself. The job of the great scholar is to hand it over to the next generation. And exactly, right. That's the word misorah, misoretic. To guard it, keep it alive, keep it moving, infuse it with re-inspiration all the time. And I would say, thank God, the Jewish people have been quite good in that for the Jewish people. Um, and we're often thanked by people of the nations for keeping the Torah over the millennia, keeping it so that it's not only meaningful for us, but it's meaningful for the nations as well. We've had people tearfully saying that to me and my wife. Thank you for keeping it across these many thousands of years and engaging with it and passing it on. So, any other quick thoughts, questions?
Just thank you for taking time out of your day.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure, and beyond a pleasure, it's a privilege. Feel free to write on the WhatsApp if you have any questions, comments. Happy to read it and respond. Otherwise, God willing, we'll see you next Wednesday, 8 p.m. my time in Israel, whatever time it is for you. Thank you very much for joining us, and just be well. Let's hope the hostages come home as quickly as possible. Let's hope this war comes to an end as quickly as possible. Let's hope our hatred and despising of the Jews currently comes to an end, and all our enemies should
Amen.
meet should meet
Amen.
their should meet
Amen.
their proper reward, their proper reward. So again, thank you and have a great week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank
Be
you.
well,
Bye
everybody.
for now, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye.